off. Good evening and welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight for yet another virtual event. This one is on climbing Mount St Helens, which will be a safety clinic with Portland Mountain Rescue. I'm Liz Craig with the Mountain Shop, and tonight we are joined by Michael Hortsch. And did I say your last name right?
That works.
Close enough. And he's a volunteer with PMR, Portland Mountain Rescue. And he's going to review the gear you might need, the skills you should learn and practice, and what it takes to get to the top of this national volcanic monument. If you have questions for Michael throughout the presentation about climbing Mount St. Helens, the gear, clothing, preparation, feel free to put them in the Q&A function of Zoom or send them in the chat, and I will keep track of them. We'll stop periodically to address those questions. And with that, I will pass things over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Liz. First of all, I'd like to thank Mountain Shop for doing this. There have been our partners with PMR for many years. And in fact, I rented stuff from Mountain Shop like 40 years ago when I first climbed Mount Hood, when they were over on Broadway Boulevard. And that was the days of hemp rope, in fact. So, you know, I'm an old timer. Tonight's talk is about Mount St. Helens, and I'm assuming that this is to more of a novice mountaineer. So we're going to be talking about some very basic things. I was alive when Mount St. Helens blew up. In fact, I was in college and in Portland. So before it blew up, we would see these spurts of ash periodically for weeks and months before it actually had the big bang. Although I wasn't in actual Portland when it happened, I came back a few days later and Portland was covered with ash. And you think of ash as like from a fireplace, but no, ash is like sand. And Portland got up to an inch or two of sand in various places. And it was hard to move. You couldn't sweep it. So the fire department would loan out their old fire hoses to these huge parking lots of stores and malls. And they would take these huge fire hoses and wash away the sand from the city. And I did some of that. I sold to a local church. I helped them clear out their parking lot. But anyway, that was a long time ago now. Now, Mount St. Helens is shorter, of course. There are people who've climbed it before it blew up, but they're all much older than me. They're still around, though. It's a beautiful climb, and it's a relatively easy climb compared to the other volcanoes in the Cascades. And there's some beautiful views of it. There's Mount Hood in the background. Here's the summit. It's a friend of mine, Paige, there. She's about 10 feet from the rim. The rim usually has a cornice, so you never want to go that close to the rim without being attached to a rope. Over on the left, you see Mount Rainier. Right behind Paige are the Goat Rocks. Some of you may be familiar with in Washington. And there's Spirit Lake, in fact, over to the left below Mount Rainier. So, you want to get to the top. Well, how do you get to the top? Well, you need your legs to do that. And you can't just decide to try it someday. You need to prepare. So how I prepare for a mountain climb is I start doing harder and harder hikes with a heavier and heavier pack. So for example, you might do Angel's Rest with a 10-pound pack, and next week maybe Hamilton Mountain with a 15-pound pack, and gradually going up until you hit Mount Defiance with maybe a 30-pound pack. When you do that, you know you're ready. You don't need much more than strong legs, although hiking poles are highly recommended. I have a story of this old guy who was really having a rough time getting to the top, but when a friend loaned him his hiking poles, this old guy just started taking off. So it turns out that hiking poles probably take 5 to 10% of the weight off your legs, and they really can help you get up to the top. The comments down here about avalanche, that's of course just for winter. In the summer, you don't have to worry about avalanche or snow travel, although weather is always an issue. Before I climb a mountain, I usually start looking at the weather maybe a week in advance, maybe in 2 weeks, depending on the mountain. And so I know what kind of clothing I'm going to need, what kind of gear I'm going to need, depending on what the forecast is. But of course, you can't rely on the forecast completely. Here's some of the issues here, some of the stuff you should bring along. But for summer, there's some nuances here. In the shoulder seasons, in the fall and in the spring, you need more than this. One time I climbed up in the autumn and it had frozen the night before. So the tiny snow patches they had were just ice. And I was pretty frustrated. I got up most of the way and I realized I couldn't go any further on the ice with my hiking boots. But I realized that a little bit over to my right, somebody had gone up in spikes and created just enough of a pocket in the ice I could keep going. So now I always carry micro spikes if I'm in the shoulder season, spring or autumn, when there might have been freezing the night before. Now, of course, I could have waited a couple hours for the ice to thaw, but that would have been that would not have been good. And let's talk about clothing for a minute. I usually carry 2 pairs of gloves, a light layer and a thick layer. It's almost always cold and windy up on top. So no matter how warm or sweaty you are down below, you're almost always going to have to put on a layer or 2 when you get up above. Generally speaking, unless it's a hot day, I usually wear long underwear with convertible pants on. So in the morning when you're leaving early, it's cold. And then as you warm up, I can zip my legs off. And then at the top, when it's cold again and windy and you're not working anymore, then I can zip my legs right back on. Everybody needs a wind layer. Strange to say, the last time I was hypothermic was in the middle of the summer on about 9,000 feet on Mount Jefferson because of the strong winds. And all these volcanoes can have strong winds. And so no matter what time of the year it is, you need a rain or wind layer because no one knows what the wind's going to be like on the summer. And at time on Jefferson, when I was getting hypothermic, my words are starting to slur, my fingers became difficult to quite use. But as soon as I put on a wind layer and ate and drank, after about 15 minutes, I was good to go. Sunglasses, of course, and water. Well, I usually take about 3 liters. Some people get more, get by on less, some more. Water, of course, is somewhat heavy, but that's kind of what works for me, 3 liters. And there's always an issue, are you going to be in freezing weather, whether you should use a camelback or a tube type water reservoir, because if it freezes, then you're really stuck. So I don't use a water reservoir in wintertime or when there's a chance that the water may be freezing. I've been with climbers whose water tubes have frozen and it's not a happy scene. For winter climbing, or even in spring, since it can freeze up atop, you always have to have a crampons. Even if it's warm down below, if it freezes up above, you're just on a sheet of ice. So sometimes I've worn crampons for the last 2,000 feet. Similarly with snowshoes, if there's been recent snow, I've also worn snowshoes all the way to the summit as well. And so all these things just depend on what the condition of the snow is in wintertime. Of course, that doesn't apply so much in the middle of summer. And then the next thing is permits. That's one of the biggest issues for me. In fact, now I only pretty much climb in the free unlimited permit season from November 1st to March 31st. Otherwise, you can see the cost and the limited number of climbers, and it's pretty difficult to get a permit, but they are available. Any questions so far of that I've talked about, gear or clothing or what have you?
Yeah, we haven't had any questions. We did have someone comment that the limits have been reduced now due to COVID.
So these are the updated limits. So what they did is they decreased the April 1 to May 14. It might have been, I think, 500. Now it's down to 3. But they increased from 100 to 110, the May 15 to October 31st bracket. So it turns out 500 climbers on the mountain for Mother's Day is just I don't know if you know what Mother's Day is like on Mount St. Helens, but everybody's supposed to wear a dress, men and women alike. And so it's quite a spectacle, Mother's Day on Mount St. Helens. I've never been there, but I've heard quite a few stories about everybody's dresses on that day.
We had someone ask, how many people does a permit allow for?
Each person needs their own permit, maximum of 12 in any one group. Yes.
And then we had someone ask, how do you know when to use micro spikes versus crampons? If we have crampons, are there situations where micro spikes are preferable?
Well, crampons definitely in the wintertime. That one time I wore crampons all the way to the summit. That was thick ice. We're in the middle of winter, and I couldn't have. It was thick all the way. But in the shoulder season, when there's a light layer of snow that froze the night before, I think micro spikes would be fine. I mean, this is when there's no snow until like the last 1,000 feet. That's when I would probably think that micro spikes would be fine.
Okay. But crampons is there any reason why you wouldn't just take crampons?
No reason except for the weight. And well, actually a little bit. I can stumble with the crampons. You only stick out an inch, and I poke myself with them. Sometimes I've torn my pants with them before when I didn't quite step right. So crampons are not actually completely benign. They are required, or they're necessary often, but I never wear crampons unless I have to, because I have self-injury issues.
So sometimes they're overkill, but
yeah,
they would theoretically work where you might also need micro
yes,
spikes.
they will work at any time. That's for sure.
Great. We had someone ask, could you elaborate on using the winter route versus the summer route, and around what time of year does it switch over, and is there any time that they overlap?
Okay, so that's coming up ahead. You're anticipating me.
Perfect. So hold that thought. And then, is there ever a time, do you ever see a situation where a more technical type of snowshoe do well as far as taking the place of micro spikes or even crampons? And I think you kind of touched on this earlier.
Well, crampons are for ice and snowshoes are for snow. And so when the snowshoes are in, so you're not post-holing, sticking in your foot a foot or two every time you take a step, that's very tiring. So in fact, when I carry snowshoes every time in the wintertime, but I usually dump them about a third of the way up if I realize that I don't really need them. So up on the ridge, there's a lot of rocks. When I realize I don't need if I think I'm not going to need my snowshoes based on the conditions, I'll drop my crampons off behind a rock and take off and pick them up on the way back. And yes, crampons with heel lifters are amazing for old people like me, because I can't stretch my calves as much as I used to. Even though the climb isn't really steep, those heel lifters, so I don't have to stretch my calves so much, are really a boost for me, but really any snowshoe would work.
Totally. We have both at the mountain shop, and like, if you ask for the ones with the heel riser, they'll give them to you. There's no cost difference as long as we have them available.
I would always take the heel risers if there's no cost difference.
Yeah, exactly.
That'd be a slam dunk.
Okay, cool. I think that's all the questions for now. If you want to keep rolling.
So somebody asked about the routes. So the Monitor Ridge route starts at Climbers Bivouac. It's the Forest Service posts when Climbers Bivouac is open. That means it's snow-free. It's closed now, and it opens up sometime in May, usually, depending on the snow year. And that route closes down sometime middle November. So mid-May to mid-November is usually the Monitor Ridge route, which starts at Climbers Bivouac. It's a higher elevation, which is why it is not open during the winter. Monitor Ridge route, it's called Monitor because there's a monitor that monitors the activity of the mountain in terms of earthquakes and tremors and things like that. But in addition, there's these posts, big 10-foot round posts that are all along the way. So it's kind of hard to get lost. So there's only two main routes up, the winter one and the summer one. And both of them are pretty busy. So usually finding the route is not a problem because there's just so many people above you and behind you. However, one problem is in the wintertime, which is a much longer hike because the starting elevation is much lower. If clouds move in or fog moves in, it can be hard to find where you were. Now, often, as I said, there's a track that you can, a snowshoe track or a foot track that you can monitor, but later in the year, there's tracks everywhere. So in the wintertime, it can be quite difficult to find your way down. In fact, the last time I was up there with Portland Mountain Rescue is because of a lost climber. He had come down somewhere else than he wanted to, didn't show up that night, so we went up in the morning, but he was able to come out on his own without much help. In fact, there was a rescue just recently that Portland Mountain Rescue is not involved with, but I don't know the details much about that rescue. I think it was more of an injury than a lost climber. So in the wintertime, it would be recommended if you had some kind of GPS device to leave a few breadcrumbs for yourself. So you can find the proper way down. So when I'm climbing, no matter what mountain I'm climbing, I'm always turning around, at least every 20, 30 minutes to look behind me and see what things look like. Because I could tell you they look a lot different one way versus the other way. Now in the summertime, fog and clouds are less common and the route is shorter, so it's less chance to get lost, and you can follow those wood posts pretty much all the way down to the dirt trail. But in the wintertime, there's no such thing. And it starts looking very similar. In fact, when I first started climbing Mount Hood in the winter, Mount St Helens in wintertime, when I get up there, I'd say, now, how did we even get up here? Because it all looks like there's no obvious route when you're up there. So in the wintertime, it's best to keep track of things, but that's less necessary in the summertime. Here's a little map. Hopefully you can see my cursor. Marble Mountain Snow Park is the winter starting point right there. And the Climber's Bivouac is the summer starting route. Climber's Bivouac is a small parking area with a porta potty. And it's a small parking area. So even though I tell people to start around 7 a.m. On a busy weekend, you might want to get there a little bit early. I was there on the 1st of November, this a few months ago, 1st of November, the first day of the free climbing unlimited permit season. And I knew it was going to be busy because it was a great weekend. And I got there maybe 6:15, and I had to walk a quarter mile to the trailhead. A quarter mile is not that far. But for those people who didn't realize that it would be a busy weekend, the cars were, I don't know how far they went, but they went a long ways past me. One climber said he thought he had to hike a mile just to get to the trailhead. So on a really nice day, you might want to get there a little bit early so you can at least get somewhere near the trailhead parking. Now, in the winter, that's not an issue. Marble Mountain Snow Park is very large, very large. I've never seen it fill up. Of course, it also services snowmobiles and Nordic skiers as well, but I've never seen that parking lot full. That also has a porta potty, by the way. Here's a little bit closer view of the routes. The Climber's Bivouac on the red on the left, and the Marble Mountain Snow Park. And you can see there's at least an extra mile, both ways on the winter route, and it's almost 1,000 feet lower in elevation. So the winter route definitely is a more strenuous climb than the summer route. Although, as you can see up on top, they merge. Both of them come out on the rim, but the actual summit is a little bit to the left. But since it's about a quarter mile away, and by the time you get to the rim, most people are tired. Most people don't actually bother to get up to the absolute summit. They're happy getting to the rim and calling it a day. Here's the stats on the winter one. And here's similarly for the summer one. So let's talk about it. So from the climber's bivouac, you're going to walk for about for about an hour before on a regular trail through the woods. It's an easy, gradual climb. You'll eventually run into the Loowit trail, and then shortly after that, you'll leave the trail and enter the boulder, the lava flow. And then you'll see, that's when you start seeing the posts, these large posts, that is the route up to the summit. And you'll follow this boulder ridge most of the way up. And this boulder ridge requires use of your hands. There are areas that you don't need to use your hands, but a significant amount of hand work. So many people wear a helmet so that they actually slip. They don't bang their head up very much. And lava is sharp. And so you have to be careful with use of your hands so you don't actually get little cuts in them on the way up. It's not particularly steep, but going over boulders requires the use of hands. So that's when people run into that, sometimes they're not often prepared that, oh my gosh, I got to actually climb over rocks and boulders and around and over. Well, that's the case. Now in the wintertime, you don't have to do that. It goes up a different route and there's no climbing over any boulders because everything's covered in snow. So it's a nice straight route up. And being up there is quite beautiful. Here's a few pictures of it. The climb. I put 7 a.m. in here because that's a common time to climb, but it's not set in stone, of course. If it's going to be really busy, you might want to start sooner. If the weather's looking better, but not quite good at the start, you might start a little bit later. The problem in the wintertime is that you have fewer sunlight hours, and normally you want to get back to your car by dark. In the summertime, that's less of an issue. You can see the other comments here. So this is a winter climb here. Looks like the lower man has snowshoes on, and above them they are on skis. But this is one of the issues when some clouds or fog comes in, it's kind of hard to tell where you're going. And of course, you can tell it's sunny because they have shadows around them. But even on a sunny day, clouds and fog can come by periodically. Climbing any Cascade volcano has similar issues. Hypothermia, as we talked about earlier, I've had even that in the summertime. Avalanches. So people should not be climbing St. Helens in the winter unless they have had avalanche training. But what about those people who haven't? Well, it turns out you could go part way. I think one of the prettiest snowshoes I know of is the winter climbing trail after a fresh snowfall and under blue skies. You can probably go up about a third of the way up the mountain. You can definitely get it above tree line. As long as you stay on the ridge, there's no avalanche danger on the ridge. And you could probably get at least a third of the way up the mountain. My wife and I have done that a couple times when we weren't ready to climb, but we just wanted to get out for a snowshoe. So for people without avalanche awareness and they want to get out there, get out there. But just don't leave the ridge. Avalanches don't happen on ridges, they happen in gullies. And as you follow the winter route, you'll see that you follow the ridge, for a significant period of time. And if you don't leave the ridge, you can have a great time and a beautiful snowshoe partway up Mount St. Helens. And in fact, for the Nordic skiers, one of my favorite Nordic skis is leaving Marble Mountain Snow Park and heading east on the road over to the Lahar. And that is just a spectacular place. It's starting to grow back with trees now, but it used to be just a plain of snow and the mountain in front of you on a sunny day. It's one of my particular places to go on Nordic skis. Anyway, for those who don't have avalanche awareness, there's still plenty to do in the wintertime. You can partially climb Mount St. Helens or any of the Cascade volcanoes, for that matter, partway without worrying about avalanches. Abrasive wind-blown ash. Well, that brings up Mount Jefferson last year, 2 years ago, where I got hypothermic. There's also ash on Mount Jefferson. So the wind was blowing so hard, I felt like I was being sandblasted. Now, I've never had that on Mount St. Helens, but it could happen on any of the Cascade volcanoes. This is just your standard advice: stay away from edges. Cornices can extend much further than you think they can. And it's surprising how close people get to the cornice. I have to look away sometimes. I can't watch. But if you stand back 10 feet, generally you're pretty darn safe. Yeah, that's a reasonable guideline. Oh, this is another thing I forgot to mention. So when under gear in wintertime, don't forget your glissade pants. You know, glissading is fun. I've glissaded down St. Helens many a time, but it's not always available. The temperature has to be right. The snow has to be right. If it's icy, you can't stop. And if it's too soft, you won't go anywhere. But glissading is hard on pants. So I wear cheap pants that are wearing out because they'll ruin your Gore-Tex. And that's the other thing. You get really wet from glissading for an hour or two. Very fun, but you're quite wet when you're done. So you can only do it really on a nice day when the sun's out and you don't want to freeze. Since I'm never the fastest one at the mountain, by the time I'm on my way down, I see everybody else's glissade chutes. So it's hard to start a chute yourself unless the snow is just right. But once several people have been on it, you got to shoot down, then you can take off. So that's always a lot of fun, as a matter of fact. I've already kind of covered this a little bit, route finding, going down in the fog and the clouds. I've already mentioned, considered taking a few waypoints on a GPS. Footprints are good in the wintertime, but not so much on Monitor Ridge because it's mostly rocky. One time, in fact, I turned my group around when it became just really a whiteout. We were maybe halfway up the winter route, and we really couldn't see very much around us. And also, we had a few climbers who were going pretty slow. So I'm thinking, you know, what's my turnaround time? I want to get back by dark, and we have a hard time seeing. So that was one of the frustrating times that way. We turned our group around because it just wasn't. It didn't make sense. We weren't going to be able to get back to our cars by dark. Now, of course, you always take headlamps anyway, but you wouldn't choose to come back in the dark. And that brings up a good point about a turnaround time. Anytime you climb a mountain, you should have a time at which you decide to turn around, no matter where you're at. Putting in how far it will take to get back, you know, what time is sunset, a little bit of a cushion there. So yes, I ran into my turnaround time on Mount St. Helens in time when we had just had a slow party. And in addition to, it was a whiteout. So we weren't going to see anything anyway. Here's one of the views looking down. See, here is hard to tell where to go. I've done it enough that I don't think I would have a problem finding my way down, but GPS breadcrumbs are good things. Okay, let's stop there for a moment. Are there questions that people come up with?
Perfect timing. I was just going to interrupt you with some questions. So great minds think alike. We had someone ask, what is avalanche danger in the shoulder season?
Well, one of my favorite websites is NWAC, Northwest Avalanche Center. And they're really good. During the wintertime, they give a forecast every single day on what the avalanche danger is. However, their forecasts are average. You know, what's the average for avalanche danger, depending on whether you're above or below tree line. And we mountain climbers follow that site religiously. But in the shoulder season, there's, NWAC doesn't start putting up bulletins until there's significant snowfall, which is usually sometime around Thanksgiving. And then they usually knock off right about now, right about mid to late April, again, depending on what the snowpack is for that year. So generally speaking, there's no avalanche danger much before Thanksgiving because there's just not enough snow to avalanche. You know, it takes a fair amount of snow to do that. And the routes on Mount St. Helens are not that steep. I mean, there's some steep areas. So avalanches only occur in avalanche terrain. They don't occur just because there's a lot of snow around. So, for example, they don't occur on routes that are less than 20 degrees in incline. So in shoulder season, I'm not too worried about avalanches. In the autumn, there hasn't been enough snow to build up to cause an avalanche. And in the spring, the snowpack has settled so much that, and the route is gradual enough that avalanches just don't happen late in the spring or early in the fall on Mount St. Helens.
Cool.
Did I answer that question?
I think so, yeah. I will say that I have seen a couple things posted on like Pacific Northwest Mountaineers and some of the Facebook groups out there. It looked like there was a wind slab avalanche, not on the route, but kind of off to the side of the route. It looked like it was like skier triggered. So if you aren't hiking and you're skiing, just being aware of off the shoulders of the ridge of the route.
Yeah, so there's
avalanche terrain.
There is a chute where avalanches typically occur on Mount St. Helens. It's off to the right as you're climbing up.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're on the ridge, that is just not a concern. In fact, I've seen the results of some avalanches up there in the gullies to the right. It's kind of to the far right of the climber's trail. And so, no, staying out of avalanche terrain is an important thing. That's where avalanche awareness and taking an avalanche course helps you understand what is safe and what is not safe. However, since we brought up avalanches, I must say that this is one of the most dangerous years there's ever been in America for avalanche deaths. More people died this year in America from avalanches than in the past 50 years. I don't think many of them were in the Cascades. Most of them were in the Rockies, but there was a lot of them. And people are thinking that people are just so tired of being pent up from COVID that just wanted to get out despite dangerous conditions. In fact, these people who died were not novices. They'd all taken avalanche courses, but that's a whole separate issue of why people do things, enter dangerous territory when they know better. There's all kinds of mental things that happen in people's heads when they see the fresh powder and they fail to use their hard-gained knowledge about what not to do, and they do it despite that. That's a whole nother talk about why experienced avalanche people die in avalanches. It was a terrible year.
It was. We had another question. Is there a recommended time to start heading up the worm flows route? And then another question that came through actually in an email to me before the event was, why do people start climbing so early? They've been tracking a lot of climbers and seeing them start at daybreak. Do you want to give any explanation for that?
Okay, so let's say you start at 7 a.m. and you're making pretty good time. So you're up there, let's say 6 hours. So what time is that? That's 1 o'clock. And then if it's a nice day, you want to sit on the summit and enjoy the view and have a lunch. What time is it now? Now it's 1:30. And then you have to go down. And now going down takes not as much time. We'll say 4 hours. So now 1:30 is now almost 5:30. And then for Portlanders, it's an hour and a half drive to get back to town. And so I wouldn't want to start any later than that. And in fact, on a busy day, I'll even start earlier. And of course, in the wintertime, you just have a much smaller window of daylight hours. So in 7 a.m., it's actually dark in January when you're starting at 7 a.m. And it's dark, and sunset, it's, pretty much around, before 5. And so you have a much shorter window. And if somebody gets injured or has a problem, your cushion rapidly diminishes. I guess that's, it's not just as much of an issue in the summertime. And of course, I've seen people go up late in the day. This last November, I saw people going up late afternoon. And I asked them, it's pretty late. I mean, I care about people. I don't want them to get stuck in the dark. And they say, oh, I'll turn around. As important mountain rescue, we're always looking at other climbers if we see unsafe activity or something that we don't think is right. So when I see people doing things that concern me, I ask them, it's pretty late, and it's, sunsets in 2 hours. What's your plan?
Maybe they're setting a fastest known time. They're just gonna run up it.
Maybe I've beat that one to death.
Hey, it's a valid question, and especially if you're the one that might have to turn around and go back out.
Yeah, sometimes I want to get out the mountain fast, so I don't have to see what happens.
And then we had one other question about glacier travel on Mount St. Helens. Is there any concern with traveling over the Swift Glacier? It looks like you avoid it in the winter route picture.
Yeah, the winter route is not a glacier. It's a snow field. So there's no actual glaciers that we cross. Okay. And so there's no issues about crevasses. So that's why people don't rope up. Even when it's really icy, and you have crampons on, and you have to be careful. It's probably safer not to rope up, because if you fall, it's more than likely you're going to pull somebody else with you. So everybody pretty much climbs on their own. I can't say I've ever seen a rope on Mount St. Helens.
Okay. I think that answers all of our questions that we have pending for now.
Okay, so what if things don't go well? Here's a little vignette without coming back, and something bad happens. Because bad things happen. No matter how safe you are, no matter what the best gear you own, things happen. And so in this little vignette, Debbie has injured her leg. So now what happens? It's late in the day, you're on your way back. You started a good time, but still it's late in the day. Nearly every group I've ever been in has a leader, even if it's an informal leader, or no one actually says you're the leader. Usually the person with most experience usually is the one who directs the ship. And when something happens, somebody has to organize things. That doesn't have to be the leader of the climb. Maybe there's a medical person on board, or somebody else who actually has more experience with injuries. But somebody has to help organize the team to help this injured person. Now, in a large group, the leader can direct things and not be involved with, hands-on. But if there's just a small team of 2 or 3, everybody has to help out. The most important thing is safety. Is the place where you're at safe? Now, this isn't so much a problem on Mount St. Helens, but if a person falls on Mount Hood and they're underneath a ledge where there's rock fall or snowfall, that person needs to be moved before they can even be attended to. So first thing, of course, is to be sure everybody's safe, and then attend to the victim, try to figure out what is going on. And make sure everybody else is safe at the same time. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but leadership in stressful situations is something. I've been in situations where people freeze up. They're not. It's frightening what has happened to your friend, and you don't know what to do, and your brain can become scrambled. whereas other people seem to be more cool under stress and can not get too anxious or excited and be able to take care of what needs to be done. Everybody has different skills, it turns out. Here's our standard. This is a national standard for how to take care of injured people. Scene assessment, as I mentioned. Are we safe where we're standing? Are we in the middle of a rock fall or snowfall or next to a crevasse or whatever it might be? We don't want more victims, one's enough. So first of all, are we okay where we're standing? And if not, we need to move. Safety, not just the person who's injured, but everybody else. Let's say you're on a slope, it's kind of steep. So you would anchor yourself in with your ice axe, for example, or kick out some flat area with your boots. And then you you assess what the injuries are. A sprained ankle, you might be able to tape use your duct tape or your medical tape and tape that thing so it's more like a cast. And so a person could come down under their own power with some hiking poles and an immobile foot. That'd be a very reasonable thing to do. If it's more a serious injury and they can't evacuate and they can't self-rescue, well, then now we have to figure out what to do. And here's some questions to ask. Will everyone survive without a rescue? Maybe you can't get down tonight. Maybe you've injured yourself so you can walk slowly, but you still can walk and you'll get out in the dark. Well, is that going to be a problem? If everybody has headlamps and the route is pretty clear, coming out in the dark is, it's not a bad thing. In fact, you're probably going to get out faster if you do it yourself than if you wait for others to do it. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Let's say there's a bleeding problem. If you can't stop that bleeding, that's a life-threatening injury. Or it could be a medical issue. I'm an old dude. Potentially, I could have a heart attack up there. And it often comes back, can you get out by yourself or not? So one problem with Mount St Helens is that reception is quite limited, cell phone reception. Now, on the summit, I think I've gotten a few texts before, and I probably sent a few texts, but down below, there is absolutely no service, certainly not in the forest and not a little above tree line either. You really are all by yourself in terms of phone coverage, unless you're nearly on the top of the mountain. So if the person can't move and you don't have cell reception and your group is big enough, you will send a couple people for help. Normally, you would never send an individual by yourself. Normally, you'd always send a team of two because, again, there can be some issues about finding your way back to the vehicle and then driving to cell reception. I've been in a scenario where a person was badly injured. There was no cell reception. There were just two of us. I had to leave my wife, ski for help, wait for the paramedics, then bring them back to her. That was a very bad day. I guess we'll go through some of these. We talked about cell phone. Personal locator beacons, PLBs. Turns out they're monitored by the Air Force. I have one. And they're satellite coverage. So as soon as I turn them on, the satellites pick them up, and it's my PLB is registered with the Air Force. That's the standard. And they'll come looking for me because I won't turn it on unless it's a life-threatening emergency. So that one is always monitored. InReach, they're becoming more and more common. InReach and Spot are somewhat similar. You can alert friends and families that you need help. I've never seen a satellite phone in the Pacific Northwest. Those are more for more remote places. Any questions about any of these items here?
We haven't had any questions about emergency signaling or on mountain rescue. We did have some prior to that, but I think we can save them for the end. They're not totally relevant to the current questions or the current topic.
This picture down here is not from Mount St. Helens, it's from Mount Hood, and you can see the helicopter there. Helicopter rescues are always iffy. We don't have a dedicated helicopter to Mount Hood or Mount St. Helens or Mount Adams or even any of the Three Sisters. I mean, it's kind of, if they're available, they are. If they aren't, they aren't. So we can never count on them. And as in Portland Mountain Rescue, we never do count on them. We hope for them on occasion, but we never can count on them because they may be available or not. Which is different from Mount Rainier. The National Park System has dedicated helicopters. There's a little bit of difference of a national park. So Portland Mountain Rescue doesn't have primary responsibility for Mount St. Helens, so we go there only intermittently. And the last time I was up there was a lost climber when there was a lot of rescue teams from the area to try to blanket the area with the searchers. Normally the volcano rescue team does most of the rescues up there. Other teams are called in when there's more, they just need more bodies to look. How long will it take? Well, let's go through a timeline. Let's go through the timeline that my wife needed rescuing. She got injured at noon. It took me an hour to get out to cell reception. It took half an hour to get paramedics. They were on snowshoes. It took them 2 hours to get to her. But two people cannot rescue a woman who or a man who has a busted knee. And so we sat around for a couple more hours to wait for more staff, more people to pull ropes, more people to pull a sled. So the bottom line is it took 12 hours from the time of the injury to get to the emergency room. So it takes a long time to gather the rescuers, gather the gear, figure out what kind of equipment they need, and then get to the subject. Now, it turns out that just a couple of weeks ago, a rescue happened on Mount St. Helens that they used a snowmobile. Now, snowmobiles aren't allowed in wilderness. So on Mount Hood, we're not allowed to use snowmobiles in the wilderness area, but Mount St. Helens is not a wilderness area. So in this particular situation, volcano rescue team was able to get to the victim quicker than usual because they had a snowmobile at their disposal. I don't know if they have a snowmobile regularly available to them, but they did a few weeks ago. So the point is, if you can self-rescue, if there's any way you can get back to the car on your own, you're going to be way ahead of the game than waiting for rescuers to come, who are living their lives, having to drive an hour or two to get there, gather all their gear, and then try and get to your location. So the timeline is unbelievable. So the last rescue I did was up on Mount Hood in the Luther Calor. That woman was injured around 9 o'clock, I think. We finally got the call around 10. We got there about noon. Took another at least 45 minutes to an hour to gather all the gear we needed. It was a difficult rescue, so we needed multiple ropes, a lot of equipment, sleds to get to her. Then we took the snowcat to top of the Palmer. Then we had to ski over to her. So even though the injury happened around 9 or so, she got back to Timberline Lodge right at dusk. So rescues are very time consuming, very tedious for the victim. So always try to figure out a way to get down by yourself if you possibly can. I think that's the answer to that. Here's some standard items. Try not to move around. It's hard to find somebody who keeps moving around. Shelter, keep warm, hydration, food. Often what happens in a rescue, an emergency situation is somebody has been climbing all day and they've been taking pictures. So when something happens, their phone is often, almost dead. So I always tell people that most people should keep their phones off. One person or two person or three can take the pictures, and then when their phone dies, then other people will have a fresh phone. So everybody does not need their phone on all the time. And so in a group, it's best if several of you keep your phones off, so that if you need them in an emergency situation, you'll have phones that work. There's been many situations when phone cells die right when you most need them. Very frustrating for the victims and for the rescuers. I think that's about there. One of the bullet points is keep up morale. One of the best ways to keep up morale is to start a fire. You can't believe what a fire does for morale. Now, a fire would be pretty hard up on top of Mount St Helens, but if you get back in the forest, it takes a little bit of work, but you can make a fire in the wintertime. There's ways to get her to do that. And if you don't know how to start a fire in the wintertime, that'd be something to learn. For even hiking, you don't have to be a mountain climber to where making a fire in the wintertime would be a very useful thing. And I can't think of a better morale builder than having a fire. These are probably almost obvious, but sometimes people want to do too much and they get in our way. So offer to help, but we'll let you know if we need you. And now we're just about the end of our talk. I would like to say that Portland Mountain Rescue is always looking for volunteers. In fact, we recruit every other year. We have a 2-year cycle of teaching people what they need to know. You don't need to, we just need to be an average mountaineer to join. We don't need exceptional people, but we need people willing to go out when conditions are not good, to leave their home when they'd rather not, for the help of your colleagues, for the people in the mountains who need you. In fact, that's how I got involved in Portland Mountain Rescue when my wife needed rescuing. Okay. By the way, the website there has information on how to apply for Portland Mountain Rescue. I encourage you to do that before June 1st, which is the cutoff for applications. But the more the merrier. We can always use more people. Thank you very much for your patience. Hopefully I'm getting dark. Hopefully this has been helpful for you. I'm certainly willing to answer questions for as long as people want to ask.
Perfect. We have a couple questions already queued up. We had someone ask a question about if you have any experience skinning up Mount St Helens. I would assume on skis.
So in the wintertime, that is probably the preferred way to go, but most people will walk. And I do have skins, and I've skinned up Mount Hood as far as the Hog's Back, but I could only skin up Mount St Helens under perfect conditions. I'm an average skier, and so and I usually lead people who are not on skis, so I normally don't go on skis. But if under perfect conditions, if the snow is just right for me, yeah, I could do that.
And do you know if overnight parking or camping in the parking lot is allowed at Marble Mountain Snow Park? It
is allowed. Often people come up the night before and camp, although it's not warm. It's not warm. Very common though.
Okay. We had someone say that they are used to starting big mountain hikes between 2 and 3 a.m. They've never actually tried going later. Is there a particular downfall or benefit on Mount St. Helens to starting early, aside from starting the first few hours in the dark and trying to catch a sunrise? I hear from others that it's important to start extra early for mountains like Hood to avoid catching too much icefall later in the day, but that seems like that isn't the case on Mount St. Helens.
Yeah, they are really two different mountains. So in the summer route, it takes about an hour and a half to get to the lava flow. And I would not want to go through the lava flow in the dark. You're using your hands, it's rough. If you fall, it's really easy to cut yourself. So on those sharp rocks. So I would not want to do that in the dark. In the winter route, it's about an hour out of the trees. And if you really know your way, route finding is always an issue. But if you're familiar with the path and you can find it in the dark, no, there's no reason not to. You can go earlier in the wintertime.
Cool. Do you have any recommendations for courses to take after an Area 1 or an Avalanche Level 1 course if they want to climb Pacific Northwest volcanoes?
Well, if you've taken an Area 1 course, you can climb. That's enough for all the volcanoes. You don't need more than that. Now, all the volcanoes are different. As we just talked about, in Mount Hood, you start early, at least in the spring. In the winter, you can start Hood in 5 or 6 a.m. But you don't do that on Adams. You don't do that on St. Helens. You do start early on Rainier. I would start early on Baker. Shasta's not so much matters. So yeah, every mountain has its unique characteristics to decide whether you want to leave early or whether you need to start really early, dark hunted or not.
Sure. I think that question might have been asking about like any further education after an avalanche course or in tandem with an avalanche course for climbing the volcanoes.
Well, I'm a member of the Mazamas. I've been a Mazama for 20 years. So Mazamas they don't teach avalanche courses, but they teach all kinds of mountaineering courses, beginner, intermediate, advanced. And of course, there's Area 2 courses for further avalanche awareness. So I've just spoken to a person who just took the Area 2, and because of so many deaths recently, they've changed the course of avalanche. They're kind of bisected. There's a path more towards teaching it, and there's more of a pathway towards not teaching, but just becoming more and more aware. So a path for the people who want to teach course and those who just want to be aware of it. But there's always more to learn. I've never taken an Area 2 myself. I haven't really needed that. My advice is to stay out of avalanche terrain. I know enough now that I know what I don't know. And I know what avalanche terrain is, and I stay out of it when I can. Having said that, as I talked about recently, a ridge is a safe place to go. So one can go part way up Mount St. Helens without any concerns about avalanche. So that route is a low risk route, at least, a third of the way or half the way up the mountain.
Someone else said they have a permit for May 18th. Should they plan on snowshoeing?
May 18th, there's going to be snow up there. Not low down, but higher up. But probably not snowshoes. This will be snow that will have been thawed and frozen and thawed and frozen. So snowshoes are for fresher snow. So I definitely though would be taking either micro spikes or crampons.
And someone else said they have a permit for the last week in April. Do you have any experience with the likely conditions within that time frame of winter route versus summer route distinction?
Well, this year the Climbers Bivouac will not be open in a couple of weeks. It's a good snow year, so you will be leaving from the Barber Mountain Snow Park, and in in a couple of weeks, you probably won't be any snow at the parking lot. You probably won't hit snow for a couple hours. But I would probably take snowshoes and crampons in April. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Are there any another questions? Well, someone asked kind of more specific about webinars. are we planning to have similar Zoom webinars like this one for other Oregon, Washington mountains? We did have one on Mount Hood a couple weeks ago, and it's on our YouTube channel. And then we'll probably have one on Mount Adams a little bit later in the season once that trailhead thaws out. I think it's probably 4 to 6 miles still from the trailhead that's full of snow. So not quite Mount Adams season yet, unless you want a really long day.
I have one little secret. It turns out that the town of Cougar on the way to Mount St. Helens has heated public restrooms.
Ooh.
It's always cold at the Marble Mountain Snow Park or at Clemmer's Bivouac. So we usually meet at the public restrooms in Cougar, and they're warm. That's where we get organized, figure out what gear we might need, put on our layers there. So when we get to the car, we don't have to sit around and get dressed and things. We can be ready to go. And so I'm thankful to the town of Cougar for having heated public restrooms year round. So don't forget to use them there.
Awesome.
That's my little secret.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a great tip. And that's what, like 30 minutes before you get to the trailhead? It's not too far out, maybe even closer.
In fact, in terms of avalanche, since it's wintertime, you need avalanche training. Everybody carries avalanche beacons. That's actually where I do a quick beacon practice at those public restrooms, because they're warm while people are standing around. And it's usually dark in the winter time there where we start early. So we do a quick beacon practice there because most people don't practice using their beacons very often during the year. And this just gives them a little bit of oh yeah, that's how it works before we actually head on up. So that's a good place to just kind of get organized and do what you need to do. But it's where I also do a short beacon practice before we head up.
Perfect. All right. Well, if there's no more questions, do you have any final thoughts or last words, Michael?
Well, there's a lot to do on Mount St. Helens. And of course, I've mentioned snowshoeing, I even mentioned Nordic skiing, and climbing is a wonderful thing. And Mount St. Helens is probably the best mountain to get started on if you want to start climbing the volcanoes. Well, South Sister would be a similar thing, but you can't really climb that in the wintertime. The access is too far away.
Yes. Cool. Well, that is all we've got tonight, guys. Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Michael, for taking the time out of your evening to do this awesome information clinic on Mount St. Helens. Thanks everyone
okay, there's a lot of information on the web, so yes. The more you know about before you climb, the better.
Yes. And thanks everyone in the audience for participating and asking questions. We hope this webinar was informative and inspires you to learn more about the volcano and expand your mountaineering knowledge to get out and explore this national volcanic monument. And with that, I will say thank you again, everyone, and have a good night.
Thank you for inviting me. Good night.
Good night.